From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. Go to most farmers markets and you can find sourdough bread, bone broth, and even fermented foods. So, why bother making them yourself when you can just buy them? This is episode 506, and our guest today is Mary Bryant Shrader, best known as the creator and face of Mary's Nest YouTube channel. With over 1 million subscribers for decades, Mary has taught thousands, perhaps millions, how to prepare traditional foods like bone broth, sourdough bread, canning, fermenting, and more. Today, Mary explains why these traditional skills are valuable and how to begin to take steps to acquire them. She shares some of her own story with successes and failures along the way, and she goes over the biggest hurdles that we face, how to overcome them, and even what inspires her to keep going with traditional food cooking and education. Speaking of traditional foods, are you curious about raw milk? Do you wonder if you should give it a try and where you can find it in the United States? Go to our website, realmilk.com. That website is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation, and it is a source of reliable information on real raw milk. There are articles, blog posts, videos, and even podcasts that explain the benefits of raw milk and where you can find it in the United States. You'll also find insights on the politics behind raw milk and the economics of it, along with that of the conventional dairy industry. Again, all of these resources are available on realmilk.com. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Mary.
Thank you, Hilda. It's so kind of you to have me here.
Well, you have been at the forefront of this traditional food movement for a while now, and I am so interested in so much of what you're doing, but I have to start with this very simple question. Why should we bother making traditional foods in the first place? I'm talking things like sourdough bread and sauerkraut and bone broth. Why should we bother when we can buy them at the grocery store?
The bottom line is, number one, we want to make these foods and we want to eat these foods because they're better for us. They're easier to digest. We can assimilate the nutrients better, and so on and so forth. But yes, why should we make them homemade when today we can find sourdough bread at the store and we can find bone broth at the store? And that's true. However, I never want to criticize people who do buy those things at the store and at the farmer's market. And you can sometimes find very good quality things. However, sometimes it can also bust the budget. And learning how to make these things homemade is often very cost effective. And you never know what's going to happen in the world, and you never know where you may live. You never know what might be available to you or not available to you. So better to foster these skills and learn traditional skills for how to make traditional foods so that you can be more independent and more self-sufficient and not always have to depend on others.
Oh, that's a really good point. Not to mention that we can control the quality of the ingredients when we're making it ourselves from scratch, right?
That's always the case. And yes, sometimes, at farmers markets, you can find really well-made sourdough breads and high-quality bone broth and high-quality ferments. But often, if you're shopping at the grocery store, many of the ingredients can be somewhat questionable. I often find it humorous when I will see breads labeled sourdough bread, and yet the second ingredient is packaged yeast. So,
oh my
yes.
gosh. And I have to tell you a story. So I was in Florida with some friends making a wonderful dinner for a bunch of them. And I bought organic produce and all the things I wanted. And I saw in the store they had organic sourdough. And I was like, great. Actually, I'm not sure it was labeled organic because I turned it over later, Mary, and on the ingredient list it said, this food contains bioengineered products. And I was like, I was shocked. And that's the new label for genetically modified ingredients, right?
That's what I gather, yes. Yes, you never know what the ingredients are. And it's my understanding, too, that certain ingredients don't even need to be on the label anymore. So sometimes you don't even necessarily know exactly what may be in the food you're buying, even though you're reading the ingredients and you think, well, this doesn't look so bad. But I also have problems with the bone broth that's on the shelves at the grocery store because they've pressure canned it in order to make it shelf stable. And then they've damaged the gelatin because the pressure canning process heats the bone broth to a much higher temperature than we would if we were making it at home and simmering it at a temperature where the gelatin doesn't get damaged.
Mm.
And if you can find gelatin in the refrigerator section of your grocery store, it's going to be quite costly. Yet I can buy a nice pastured chicken, have a lovely chicken dinner, maybe have some leftovers, and then have a great carcass, throw in a couple of chicken feet, some vegetable scraps that I keep in my scrap bag in the freezer. And I got a great chicken bone broth, homemade, just with what I want in it.
Well, I wasn't aware of what you're talking about, that high temperature process that can take away some of the gelatinous benefits
Yeah.
of the bone broth. But I was aware because I have occasionally purchased on a convenience kind of
Yes.
mindset a little package of bone broth. And I will notice how diluted it is and basically tasteless compared to what I make at home.
Exactly. And that's because they're probably watering it down a little more than we are in our home kitchens. But also, in order to make it shelf stable, they have to heat it well above about what is the correct temperature for bone broth, around 180 Fahrenheit, to simmer it, just as I say, just those little tiny bubbles. But when they put it in those commercial pressure canners, it's going to go quite high. If you home pressure can bone broth, you're probably going to be heating it up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, depending, on what your altitude is. But who knows what they're pressure canning it in a commercial factory, it could be even higher. So when it comes to bone broth, I always really try to encourage people to make that homemade. And it's not hard.
Yes. And there's something we haven't even touched on yet, Mary, that's also a special aspect, I would say, of making these things from scratch. There's a sense of self-satisfaction, I guess I would say, or contentment that comes with providing your family with something nourishing that you made yourself.
Yes, yes. My husband always says that the secret ingredient is love.
I say that as well. We would get along, I think. So, Mary, tell me, what food did you start with when you got into this traditional food movement?
Well, my mother was born in 1925, and she lived through the Great Depression. She lived through World War II, both her and my dad. And cooking these types of foods, traditional foods, wasn't anything special to her. This was just the way you cooked and the way you ate. And she had sourdough bread. She had pastured chickens, which back then, this was not common. There was a farm down the street. She had farm fresh eggs. She had raw milk. These were common foods that she had growing up, and then common foods she was making when I was growing up. And I don't remember this exactly, but my mother tells me the story that as a little girl, I was always in the kitchen with her. She had a little white pinafore apron for me. And she tells the story that when I was about 4 years old, I might be stirring things. I don't remember what I was making, but helping her with a spoon in a bowl that she would give me. And she remembered that when I was about 4 years old, I said to her, Mama, however a toddler 4 years old talks, how do you make toast? And my mother said she was so thrilled because this was her entree of teaching me how to cook. And how to make toast meant you learned first how to make bread. I mean, this was a very basic, and she did it with the packaged yeast so that I would have success. And and it was basically what home cooks years ago used to call like a batter bread. It's sort of funny because the no kneads today are very similar, but it was kind of a watery batter in a bowl with the packaged yeast, some salt, some water, and kind of dumped it into a loaf pan. And I made my first loaf of bread. And then later on, as I got a little older, she taught me how to do a sourdough starter and sourdough bread. But that was actually her entree. She was like, oh, good. Okay, I'm going to teach her how to make bread.
That's awesome. And I guess that helps me understand because I don't feel like you're a purist. You invite people to start where they are rather than saying everything must be done exactly this way. Is that right? Am I getting that right?
That's very true. And I won't lie that I used to be a bit of a fanatic when I was younger, but with myself. And I think it was being a new mother, having a baby. I wanted everything. It's my first child, my only child, everything. I was searching out the best of everything. I had to get this chicken and those eggs and that raw milk. Just really being very fussy. I'm an older mom. My son was born when I was in my 40s. And my social circle was of younger mothers. And Sally's book had come out, Nourishing Traditions. And my girlfriends were looking at it because they were all very natural minded moms.
Mm-hmm.
And so they saw, I had the book when it came out. It was funny. I found it on Amazon online, I think, just searching. And I said, oh my gosh. And it was cute because I showed it to my mom and I was like, you're vindicated. She says everybody should be eating butter because my mother always ate butter.
Ah.
And my mom cooked like that. And she's like, oh, yeah, I'm so glad this seems to have a resurgence and whatnot. But these ladies had the book and they said, you know how to make all this stuff. Didn't your mother raised you like this? You know how to. And now I will say foods like kombucha, I was not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up with anything like that. But a lot of the other stuff, the bone broth, the cultured dairy, the ferments, the sourdough, these were all things that were regular part of my growing up and my home life and what I was making for my own family. So they said, Mary, you know how to make this stuff. Show us how to make this stuff. So every Saturday morning, the fathers would take the older children and the mothers would come with their nursing babies. And I'll never forget when I started talking about some of these things and they were reading a little deeper into Sally's book. Some people were on the verge of tears when I started talking about how to make a sourdough starter. And other people were terrified at the thought of leaving something on the counter and letting it bubble. They were like, oh, I'm going to poison my family, and this, that, and the other thing. The panic that was breaking out in my kitchen and the revolt that was breaking out in my kitchen, I quickly realized, maybe my mother's approach is right. Maybe I need to just start with teaching these ladies how to make bread, even if we use packaged yeast and all-purpose flour. And so that's exactly what I did. And it was amazing how everything, just the temperature, so to speak, in the room, everything would start to calm down when I would say, okay, because most of the people didn't know how to make homemade bread.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to make sandwich bread. So at least you stop buying what's in the plastic sleeve with the dough conditioners.
Yes.
So I would make that. And then they felt such a level of success. Then I would say, it's really not a big leap to make sourdough. So we're going to work towards that over the next couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And everybody was a lot calmer because they felt they had something under their belt to say, okay, I at least know how to make bread. I can move on. And then the same with fermentation. People were like, oh, can't we just make like refrigerator pickles? So I was like, okay, this is how you pickle food. I said, but we're going to take this one step farther. I'm going to show you how to make homemade apple cider vinegar that's going to be probiotic rich, good for our gut health. We're going to put a little bit of that into our pickled foods that you're putting in your refrigerator. I felt at least this was something. And then I said, you know what? We can go one step further and we can make something that's going to be even better for our digestive systems. And since they had learned the chopping of the vegetables and the pickling process, it was like, okay, over the next few weeks, I'm going to show you and I'm going to teach you salt and water and a brine and good bacteria and yeast. This is really okay. And then I had everybody one time, the very first time around my kitchen island, and they're doing the cabbage. We did sauerkraut, it's easy to start. And then over the next couple of days, because we were homeschool moms as well. So I would see these ladies very regularly and they would see the bubbles to start forming. And then I would bring out the pH strips to give a sense of security to everyone. And so it just kind of snowballed like that. And I never was harsh with people. And I remember one time my girlfriend was feeding her infant some white rice. And she saw me look at it and she went, oh my goodness. I made it with bone broth, like you said. I added butter. I added sea salt. I'm just using the rice as like a vehicle, like you talked about. But it was so cute. And I said, oh, you don't have to explain. It's fine. This is wonderful what you're doing. Don't worry. And then sometimes when people felt, maybe they had 3 children under the age of 5 and they felt very overwhelmed and they were like, Mary, I can't keep up. I can't keep it going. I don't know what to do. And it's hard for me. And I'm not always successful. And I'd say, take a step back, take a deep breath, just roast a chicken. Put some onions and some carrots and some potatoes in the roasting pan. Put the chicken in the roasting pan and roast it and serve it for dinner and call it a day. You're way ahead of the game because a lot of your compatriots are going through the fast food line, but you cooked a real meal. Mm-hmm. And so I was always hand-holding, always reassuring. And many times it was, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, another 2 steps forward. I realized very early on, working with people who were new to these foods and new to making these foods themselves, that you had to go slow, you had to move gradually, and you also had to be very accepting of where they were.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of trainers in a gym. They don't have you do a 24-inch box jump the first time you come to work out. People would feel like failures and they'd walk away and they'd never go back, right? So you start small, you start where you're at, and then you take on the more what seems very challenging and daunting. So I love that about you. Now, you talked about how not all the moms always felt successful. I want to hear the story of one of your cooking fails because I know you're not perfect.
Oh,
Tell
not
us.
At all. Oh my gosh. It's funny because I call them my culinary disasters and I've had many. I'm very honest about it. So I hope that other people feel that, oh, okay, she's making mistakes too. Well, I will tell you that my girlfriend is of Vietnamese ancestry, as is my husband. And she said to me, we're going to make fish sauce. Did you see the recipe? We're going to make real fish sauce. And my girlfriend's not originally from Vietnam. She's of Vietnamese ancestry. So she was not making this traditionally in Vietnam. She's an American, but having an interest in the foods of her culture.
Of course.
So I'm like, okay, let's do it. Oh my gosh. I don't know what went wrong or if it was correct. But here we were making this fish sauce and it's in her house and she calls and I'm like getting very happy because I'm thinking, wow, my mother-in-law is going to be so proud of me, and my husband will like it. And she calls me one night. She goes, Mary, it stinks to high heaven. I put it in the backyard on the deck. So, and it's cute too, because her husband is from Eastern Europe. And so this was a whole new culinary world to him,
Yeah.
And I'm sure he came home from work and was like, what's that stench? So she puts it on the deck. And then the next day we're together. And I said, what happened? Where's the fish sauce? She said, it still was smelling so bad. I had to put it all the ways into the back corner of the yard. But the funny thing about it is we really hadn't gone that far off because at the time we did, but this is years later now. And I was talking to my husband about fish sauce and he's like, yeah, it's pretty potent. It's got a pretty strong smell. So maybe my friend and I didn't do as bad as we thought. But then she got a SCOBY. And she said, I've had it. I'm not doing this. I'm giving this to you.
Coming up, Mary tells the story of her kombucha SCOBY fail. And later she explains why she's so passionate about educating people and how she got her start on YouTube at age 60.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
One Earth Health. Explore the amazing benefits of organ meats with One Earth Health. Did you know that organ meats from New Zealand are 400% more packed with nutrients compared to those from other countries? That means you get a lot more vitamins A, K, and the B complex, along with other high-quality nutrients. At One Earth Health, they put these nutrients into easy-to-take capsules. Their cows are raised in pastures without GMOs or pesticides. And what's special about the capsules? They are filler-free, just pure 100% organ meat. And the prices at One Earth Health are the best for organs from New Zealand. You can get their popular beef organ supplement bottle for just $39.99, and it comes with 200 capsules. So boost your nutrition with One Earth Health now. Go to their website, oneearthhealth.com/wisetraditions for a special sign-up page that gives you a 15% discount. Again, that's oneearthhealth.com/wisetraditions for a special sign-up page that gives you a 15% discount. And Rosita cod liver oil. Discover raw, natural nutrition with Rosita's 100% Norwegian extra virgin cod liver oil. At Rosita, they do things differently. As a small family company, they line catch their own wild cod from the pristine Norwegian fjords, and they ensure that every drop of oil is completely unadulterated and raw. The oil is gently released within minutes without processing, preserving its natural integrity. And it's naturally filtered without heat or chemicals to meet stringent EU standards for potency and purity. This all means that Rosita cod liver oil retains its naturally occurring vitamins A and D, along with a full spectrum of omega fatty acids, including omega-3 EPA and DHA. And unlike others, they never fortify with synthetic vitamins A and D. What you get is raw, unadulterated cod liver oil, just as nature intended. Rosita cod liver oil comes in two convenient forms, by the way: liquid for economical dosing for the whole family, or soft gels for easy on-the-go supplementation. It's also GAPS, WAPF, and RCP approved. So feel the difference with Rosita. Go to rositausa.com. That's ROSITAUSA.com. and use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order today. Again, visit rositausa.com, ROSITAUSA.com, and use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
She gave me the SCOBY in a jar that had the jar was wide on the bottom. It was sort of one of those 1960s orange juice jars that I think were made by Pyrex, and they had a thin neck.
Oh, yeah, I think I've seen those. And just to be clear, the SCOBY is the starter for the kombucha.
Yes, exactly. The SCOBY's the starter.
Symbiotic culture.
Kombucha. What is it? Symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeasts. So she gives this to me. And so I'm looking in Sally's cookbook. Okay, what the heck am I supposed to do with this thing? And I'm trying to figure out how to make kombucha. But my son was young and I got busy. I got distracted. My parents were older. I was busy with taking care of aging parents and a toddler and my husband and my household. So I just put it on the counter in that juice bottle, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I don't know how long went by. Months, maybe?
Oh.
Okay. I notice it one day because I've got it sitting on the counter. The thing has grown to what looks now like a small tire. So I said, well, and I'm thinking that it's mushy. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't understand this. I need to learn more. So I'm going to throw it out. And I felt uneven keel with my girlfriend because I had given her some kefir grains. I really like kefir or kefir, depending on how people say it.
Yeah.
The cultured milk drink. And I had gotten them from some woman. I didn't even know her online. She sent them to me in the mail from New Mexico. It's funny how the traditional foods world back then, people were just trading whatever. And I was making kefir. I really like it. And I gave some of the grains to my girlfriend and she got frustrated with it and she threw them out. And I said, what? Oh my gosh, I would have showed you. You should have waited. So I said, well, it's even Steven's time now. I've got to throw this SCOBY thing out. This is not working. The thing is like rubber and I cannot get it out. The opening, the bottom of the juice jar is maybe 8 inches wide. So this little rubber tire is sitting and now having filled up the bottom of this juice jar and the top is maybe 2 inches wide. And it's not pouring out. It's a disaster. I have to go in with a big steak knife to try and cut the thing. I look like something out of a horror film. I mean, it took me hours to get, because I've got to return the juice bottle to her.
Oh, I see. Because I was like, why didn't you toss out the whole thing? Oh, my goodness.
And so I get it back to her and I was like, well, we're even. You threw out the kefir grains. I threw out the SCOBY. It wasn't until years later that we decided to try again. And then we researched and we really educated ourselves and figured out what the heck we were supposed to do right. But I've had a lot of mess ups, Well,
and thank you for sharing those. It does encourage people who feel like I have no idea where to start. And it's like, okay, you may have some mess ups, but you're also going to grow in your confidence and ease in the kitchen. And there are so many resources at our fingertips now that maybe weren't available when you got started, right? I wanted to ask you if you think this traditional food movement is growing. In other words, are more people aware of kombucha and sourdough and all the things than they were even 10, 20 years ago?
Oh my gosh, it's night and day. No, even when I got the kefir grains, I mean, this is so long ago, and I was on some little chat group, and it wasn't even Facebook. It was like my Yahoo, and this lady says, "Oh, I live over in New Mexico. I'll send them to you. Just send me $1.25 for postage and handling." And I get a little plastic bag with some white-looking cauliflower things floating around in some milk. And my husband is like, "How do you know what this is? This could be poison." And I'm like, oh no, it's a traditional foods community. But nobody, I was the only one in my social circle making this. And I would
Wow.
show this to my friends. Like I said, my one girlfriend threw them out. My other girlfriends didn't even want to try. They were like, okay, Mare, I'm still trying to cope with getting used to fermented vegetables. I don't know what that thing is. Yeah. But now, oh my gosh, you hear about, and there's even the big, do you say kefir? Do you say kefir? You know, people have very strong opinions. It's comical. And kombucha, my gosh, even my local little grocery store out here is selling kombucha in the bottle and all kinds of fermented beverages. You know, it's amazing. And we have sourdough bakeries now that just do sourdough. Even my local grocery store will have a section where the chickens are, okay, these are the pastured chickens. These are the pastured eggs. It's a grass-fed beef, you know, all these things that 20 years ago, nobody was talking about this. People
I
were like,
know.
kombucha, what the heck is that? Yeah.
I know. And it's so fun to me and gratifying as I look at the Weston A. Price Foundation that was established about 25 years ago. Sally wrote her book, of course, Nourishing Traditions, and they were advocating for all these things that have now become more familiar to folks, which is wonderful. And yet, people are still facing hurdles or obstacles to actually rolling up their sleeves and getting in the kitchen. What do you think some of those obstacles are for people, Mary?
I think the fact that convenience foods have grown tremendously. And I'm not just talking about your fast food, drive food through restaurants. I think a lot of people know that for the most part, eating fast food every day isn't good for you. And I think most people know they shouldn't be driving through the fast food window every day. However, there are all these meal services that will deliver food to your door in little like pre-prepared plastic bags or something. I'm not exactly sure how it's packaged because I've never subscribed to one of them. And then you kind of have to assemble it in your kitchen. Or even at my own local grocery store, the meals are already made. And there's like maybe a little piece of meat, some vegetables, potatoes, whatever, and you put it in the oven. So what's happened is and I find it interesting because I read a study that said that the meal companies that deliver the little bags of pre-prepared foods, they found that they actually had to, for the most part, almost put the meal together for people because people were saying it was too much work.
So it's almost like pretend cooking, right? So
it's pretend cooking.
There's the broccoli with some spices. There's the rice that's already done, and you just add some red peppers or something. Yeah, wow.
You know, and so I think what's happened is, especially with younger generations, is that they've not learned the basic skills for how to cook. And that's why it's so important to me. I love the way Sally's expression of teach, teach, teach. Amen to that. Because we have to get in the kitchen with younger people and we have to show them some basic knife skills, some basic cooking skills, saute, boil, whatever the case may be, so that they feel confidence because you're not going to be able, because I saw this with my own social circle, you're not going to be able to get people to consider even making the effort to find a pastured chicken if the thought of cutting up that chicken is so beyond, as the expression goes, their pay grade. They were like, oh, what am I supposed to do with a whole chicken? Are you kidding? You know, they want the prepared chicken breast and the seasoning. We've trained our young people to be like that by what's provided in the grocery store and these meal services. Instead, we need to bring young people into our kitchen. We have to say, this is a whole chicken. I'm going to show you how to cut it up. It's really not that hard. And you don't even need good knife skills. If you have a good kitchen knife, good kitchen scissors, I can show you how to cut out the backbone, and we can even spatchcock it if you don't want to cut the whole chicken.
Yes. And so I wanted to ask you, is this what motivated you to start your YouTube channel, is to get those younger people with the skills that they need to get them trained and understanding so they could be comfortable in the kitchen, the importance of preparing these meals and how to go about it?
Oh, very much so. I had been teaching this for so many years right here in my kitchen, just to people locally, whomever wanted to learn. And when my son went to college, he and my husband said, there's YouTube. You feel really passionate about this and you get really excited teaching people how to make these foods and keeping these skills alive. You can reach a much broader audience if you make videos and put them on YouTube. And it was kind of funny because at the time I was 60 years old and it's not something that I knew how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually had to search on YouTube, how do you make YouTube videos? And then I took a little course to understand what was involved. And I said to my husband, oh, okay, I think I have the basics. And so he's like, oh, I'll help you. And he put the camera on the tripod and then he ran a wire to a laptop in the dining room so he could watch what I was doing and making sure it was actually filming. And here I am at my kitchen island, and I'll never forget day one. Well, I'm in my kitchen by myself and I'm looking at a camera lens and I'm like, okay, this is a little odd.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, I'm just going to name her. All right, Sally Sue. We're going to make bone broth. But that was really my reason, was to reach a broader audience and hopefully younger people.
Yes.
And I feel very encouraged by that because a lot of the comments and the emails I get are from younger people who tell me they were never taught how to cook or how to bake.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me. So you were definitely feeling a need. And we've discussed how there was a whole, even when you were just meeting with these young moms, you were an older mom and you realized, oh my gosh, they don't know how to do these foods. Now think of all the years that have gone by since that time. My question to you is, what are people enjoying that you've put out that is really resonating with your younger audience?
People had such an interest, and I think this is because of the keto movement, how to make sauerkraut, because it's low carb and very digestible. And how to make sauerkraut is extremely popular. It's cute because people have said, oh, can you show how to make kimchi? And I said, oh, I'll have to get around to that one day. And then after that, bone broth. And then a lot of people showed interest in just a very basic sandwich bread that I shared with them, which was the original sandwich bread my mother showed me how to make. And people really appreciated that because they didn't know how to bake. No one had ever taught them how to bake bread. And I find it so rewarding because I get to know a lot of these people in comments and in emails. And, I call them my sweet friends on my Mary's Nest YouTube channel because I really feel that way. I engage a lot with my viewers. And I love because people will say, I just wanted to let you know, I've been baking the sandwich bread for a couple of months now, and I've not bought the bread in the sleeve at the grocery store. My children like it. They're eating it. And I just started my sourdough starter today. Yeah. And it's a journey. And I always say that you're on a traditional foods journey and you start little by little. And I always tell my viewers, and just like I told my ladies in my social circle, this is a journey. This can take you a year or more, even 2 years, to really be up and running where you have an efficient traditional foods kitchen where you're roasting your chicken, you're making your bone broth, you're checking on your ferments at night before you go to bed, you're feeding your sourdough starter, you're mixing your dough, you're maybe going to bake it the next morning, or you stick it in the refrigerator for 18 to 24 hours. It's not the end of the world. It's going to be fine. I always tell people, you don't need to be perfect. We're home cooks.
Yeah.
Our sourdough bread does not need to look the way the one in the bakery does. The baker has to guarantee his sourdough bread will look the same, for the most part, every time he goes to sell it. But we don't. People just walk in and they go, you're baking bread?
Yeah.
You're baking sourdough bread? It's okay if it's not perfect. People will never notice.
Well, the thing is now, I don't think people are comparing it to the bakers. They're comparing it to what they see on social media.
Oh.
And I'm telling you, the sourdough I see out there, they've got all the nice little designs and stuff on it. That would be intimidating to me. I'd be like, oh, I can't possibly make something that looks as good as that.
Yeah. And that's why I always slice the breads I make and I always open them because I'm doing that in real time. while something's baking, my husband and I just have downtime and do something else. And then when the bread comes out of the oven, I let it cool a little and then we put the camera back on and I always cut the bread and I always show it. And I don't do any fancy decorating. And sometimes I don't even tell them, don't worry if you don't have a lamb. And please, if you have small children, don't be taking out the razor blade and getting all fancy. Just if you have a paring knife, even if it's not that sharp, just make a cut. Or if you don't even want to deal with that, just dump it in the pan upside down and let it crack whatever way it wants to. We don't need to be fancy. And I always say something I pride myself on is I am the last person who will ever be, what do they say, Pinterest perfect or Pinterest ready or Instagram ready?
Yeah.
Because that's unrealistic. And you're making people try to obtain something that for most home cooks is unrealistic. So that's why I say just put a slash on the top if you want. Don't worry about it. I always cut it. I show. Sometimes it's got some pretty nice air holes. Sometimes it doesn't. And you know what I say? Good. Less butter is going to fall through.
I love that. And so what else would you recommend for the novice cook, Mary? I think you have a term for the kind of modern pioneer in the kitchen. If we want to get started, I noticed that you mentioned roasted chicken and bone broth. Would that be the place to get started in trying these things out?
I definitely feel that that is the best place to start. Number one, when you learn how to just become comfortable holding a whole raw chicken. And I always tell my friends, because some would be really squeamish, some would be screaming. And I would have them put the plastic disposable gloves on. So that they would feel a little level of comfort. Whatever you have to do, just become comfortable holding a whole raw chicken. Don't even tie the leg. It'll actually cook faster if you don't tie the legs, if you feel uncomfortable tying the legs. Don't truss it. You don't need to do any of that. If you can just get it in the pan and get it in your oven, you're so far ahead of the game. But I always tell people, just learn how to roast a whole chicken because then you have that carcass. And if you're able to get, and I normally recommend saving it in your freezer till you have 3 carcass if you don't have any chicken feet, because that'll help you get a nice gelatinous chicken bone broth. If you have the feet, great, because that's going to do the job even with 1 carcass. I tell the people, just get all the meat off the carcass, throw the carcass in your stock pot. You don't need special equipment. Most people have a very large saucepan or at least, a smaller stock pot. And I always teach people that when you cut up vegetables, save the onion skins, save the carrot shavings, save the bottom of your celery. So you can even just throw those in. You don't need special dedicated vegetables. If you want to do it, it's fine. But you can also just throw in your scraps, pour some water in there just to cover, bring it up to a boil, immediately turn it down to a low simmer, and just let it simmer for 6 hours. You've got something that is so incredibly nutritious, and it was not hard. The level of success I see amongst people when I'm teaching them how to cook, that they were able to roast a chicken, it's like they learned how to fly a spaceship to the moon. The joy and the happiness I see when people tell me that. And then the first time they taste their own homemade bone broth, I remember my girlfriend Sue called me up and she said, while it was simmering, it still had all the onion skins. Everything was like floating around in it. I took a spoon and tasted it. It was delicious.
Oh my gosh, that's so satisfying.
I think that's the easiest place to start. And then I generally tell people, I usually leave sourdough more towards the end because that's a little more, getting your sourdough starter going. It takes a little patience and depending on the conditions in your kitchen, there's a lot of variables. But usually what I recommend is after you make roasted chicken and make bone broth, and you can do beef bone broth as well. Then I usually say, I show people how to make homemade yogurt because yogurt is a very popular food. And I show them how to do it with just 2 bowls and some warm water and an oven that's been turned off, but may have a pilot light or an electric light. And I show them how to do this. No yogurt maker needed. You got 2 bowls, you got some milk, you get a little yogurt from the grocery store that's got live cultures in it. It's not perfect. What you make homemade is going to be a lot richer. And then after that, just save a little bit and keep making it. And that's another thing. People will say, oh my gosh, I haven't bought yogurt in 6 months. I'm making my own yogurt. It's so much better. It's so easy. Thank you. Then we move on to ferments. Ferments, I often tell people they're a little persnickety.
Right.
It takes a little more of a learning curve, but pH strips have just been such a godsend to people who are afraid of ferments, because when they see that their ferment is become a high acid food, 4.6 or lower on the pH strip, that then they feel, oh, okay, this is safe to eat, because most bacteria, bad bacteria, is not going to do well in an acidic environment. So they're like, okay, I'm not going to make myself or anybody else sick. So that I think is cute, because I didn't have those when I was starting out. I just kind of had to wing it.
Right, which I'm sure is how our ancestors did it. And I actually remember when I was first trying to make kombucha thinking, oh my gosh, my kombucha is going to kill me. Like I got nervous about the same way.
Yes.
So I love how you allay people's concerns and really take them step by step on the journey. So of course, we'll put links in the show description to your YouTube channel, to your website, to all the things so people can learn more from you, Mary. And I'm grateful that we've had this conversation. Now I want to pose to you the question I love to pose at the end of the show here. If the listener could do one thing, just one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
Oh, gosh, that's excellent. Well, you know what? I'm a firm believer in when you sit down to eat, take a deep breath, say a prayer, and assuming that you are eating a traditional foods diet, you're probably eating some animal product in there, and just be grateful and give a thank you to the animal for making the ultimate sacrifice so that you can eat and enjoy it. Eat nose to tail. Don't waste anything.
Perfect words to end on. Thank you so much, Mary. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it was so nice meeting you, Hilda. I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Our guest today was Mary Bryant Shrader. You can visit her website, marysnest.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada Gore, the host and producer of this podcast on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. CK Foodie says this: great podcast. This is an excellent podcast that brings to light a variety of issues related to health. I have learned so much by listening over the past few years. The topics that are discussed are unique and thought-provoking as well. CK Foodie, thank you for your review. It means a lot. And you too can leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Go to ratings and reviews, give us a bunch of stars, and tell the world why they should listen too. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well, and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.